Hmm. Yes, legends. Hope we're good. Right, in this training, we are going to be chatting about, actually, I'm going to close this one off. Yeah, we're going to be chatting about hybrid training and getting a clear definition of what hybrid training is. Because regardless of what the fitness industry like to tell you now, there is a clear definition of what perfectly describes hybrid training. I think a lot of people now are like to put their own description on what hybrid training is. They train in a certain way, all of a sudden they're a hybrid athlete or they're training in a hybrid modality. So in this training, we're going to get crystal clear of what hybrid training actually is, because believe it or not, the internet has the receipt. Hybrid training was first popularized by a guy called, I always butcher his surname, but it's Alex Vieda. I want to say his surname is, that's how you pronounce it. And he actually wrote a book. He studied it and wrote a book, published a book called The Hybrid Athlete. And in that book, he perfectly describes what hybrid training actually is. So we're about to get crystal clear on that. And then we're going to go over a little bit about the programming and some kind of key common mistakes that's made within like correct hybrid programming. So bear with me. All right, let's show it over here. The aesthetics aren't anything groundbreaking. I just really wanted to get this training out. This training is more about just listen to the information that is coming at you. But hybrid training. What is hybrid training? The perfect or the exact definition of hybrid training. This is copy and pasted out of the Hybrid Athlete book. It's this: the concurrent training of different athletic disciplines that do not exclusively support one another and whose disparate components are not essential to success at any one sport. That is the clear definition of what hybrid training is. So, what does that look like? That is, we look at, we take a power lifter who wants to get a bit fitter. Powerlifting and let's say long distance endurance running, being a better runner does not make you a better powerlifter. Being a better powerlifter does not make you a better runner. So therefore, that is hybrid training. Weightlifting and swimming, long distance swimming. Swimming does not make you a better, or being better at swimming does not make you a better weightlifter. Being a better weightlifter does not make you a better swimmer. So therefore, hybrid training. Powerlifting and bodybuilding, having more muscle will in fact make you stronger, which then can help you become a better powerlifter. That is not hybrid training. That is strength and hypertrophy training. It actually goes very, very well in one modality of training, one condensed program. It goes very, very well. This may ruffle a few feathers. I know I've had a few debates over my time on this. Hyrox isn't hybrid training. You can, although, and this I think is where people get a little bit confused, you can train in a hybrid style, strength and endurance, and get better at Hyrox. But training for Hyrox, specifically for Hyrox, when we're looking at endurance, especially running endurance, power, strength, muscular endurance, if you're training those components by itself, you're in turn becoming a better Hyrox athlete. So if you have strength, power, muscular endurance, and conditioning in there, that is then therefore going to make you a better Hyrox athlete. So it's not hybrid training. On the other hand, if you were to do a powerlifting meet and train Hyrox components and running, because powerlifting won't make you a better Hyrox athlete, and training Hyrox components won't make you a better powerlifter. Therefore, that is hybrid training. That's cross training. It's two different components of training. So I think that's where a lot of people get a little bit confused. All right. Hyrox is a sport, like CrossFit is a sport, like football is a sport with resistance training in a footballer's off season. Rugby is a sport. They have resistance training in their off season, pre-season, and in season. Right? Doesn't mean that they train hybrid. It's just they've got resistance training to make them better at the sport. The resistance training is specific to the sport. Hyrox is a sport. It's not hybrid training. I know a lot of people like to say it's hybrid fitness racing. I wouldn't even say that. It's just fitness racing. It's a fucking great fitness race at that. I honestly do believe it is the true test of fitness. Definitely not hybrid training. All right. So that is the clear definition of what hybrid training actually is. Okay. So with mixed modal training approach, how do we actually program it? And I think all too often, this is where we see a lot of kind of junk volume getting thrown into programming. Junk volume being you've just thrown in far too many sets, far too higher rep ranges, or far too many rep ranges in there that your body's not really recovering as best as it possibly can. And that's, of course, with good nutrition, good recovery, good stress management, of course. But there's just too much junk volume in there for individuals. And what tends to happen is we don't actually know before we get into hybrid training. People don't actually know how to program things. Say it's a powerlifter who wants to get into marathon running, for example. All they know in their experience will be is just full powerlifting program. So what they do is they go, right, I don't know anything about running, so what I'm going to do is look on Google, do a little bit of research, look at marathon programming, pull that PDF off Google, and then they try and merge the two. There's going to be a lot of junk volume there. There's a 100% of a powerlifting plan and a 100% 100% plan for marathon running. You're going to be operating at 200% then. So there's going to be a lot of junk volume. Hybrid training is all about turning up certain dials, turning down other dials. It's not about just doing more. How much disciplines can we throw into one program, and hopefully some of it sticks. Hopefully we'll be doing enough that will make progress. That is a surefire way to make fuck all progress and lead to burnout, lead to poor recovery, lead to more frequent deload weeks and reduced volume weeks and things like that, which is going to be a stop-start process in your journey. So it's definitely not about trying to do more. It's about quality of work rather than the quantity of work that we actually need to look at there. All right. So when it actually comes down to programming it, it's about, right, how do we manipulate the volume? How do we look at the intensities of pushing? Again, we're going to use the example throughout this whole training of a power lifter and an endurance athlete, combining the two into a hybrid athlete, right? How do we take the best components of a powerlifting program and the best components of a marathon program and merge it into two without operating at 200%, right? We start at baseline, right? So for example, if we're benching 3 times a week, squatting twice a week, deadlifting once a week, and we've got like 30 sets across all those 3 movements, for example. But then we also have a marathon running plan, which is going to start you off at 30-mile weeks. We will not be able to recover from that. So what we need to do then is trim the bullshit, trim the shit off it, trim the fat off the program. So instead of doing 30 sets and 30 miles, let's start at baseline. Let's try and look at 10 sets across the entire week and 10 miles across the entire week. And let's run that for 7 days. Let's run that for 14 days. Let's see how we're progressing. Let's see how the body's feeling. Let's see where our recovery capabilities are at, and then make an adjustment and a change if and when needed. So you always start slow. You always start small and build up from there. You don't start off with very, very high volume, because again, it's going to lead to a stop-start kind of process there. So that's what we do. We look at starting at baseline and then building from there. It's about self-analyzation, looking at the end of your week, the end of a couple of weeks, the end of a training block, and then really assessing your progression, really assessing how habits have been around training, and we look at the fatigue levels to progression levels and go, right, okay, this is where we're at, this is where we can progress. And then the key thing is, and again, sometimes I think it's overlooked, is specific phases in your training as well. This is something that's massively overlooked and needs to be more dialed in. It needs to be, it needs to happen, especially when we're looking at pushing strength and endurance, for example. You know, we need to be able to phase our training and have a specific intention. Like I said at the start, hybrid training is all about turning up some dials while other dials get turned down. So we're still operating 100% rather than 200%. So for example, if we're starting out on our hybrid journey, and we're taking, again, the example of a powerlifter who's wanting to get a bit fitter and dive into hybrid training, and that individual won't necessarily need a lot of strength volume because that's his background, that's their background. So what we need to do is, or what we can do is, the first specific phase of training will be to turn the dial down in the strength side of things, while we can ramp up the volume and slight intensities within the endurance side of things. So it's turning that dial up, it's turning the endurance dial up, while we're turning the strength dial down. And what that will happen then is we'll start seeing a better balance of overall volume and intensity. So overall kind of work capacity then. All right. There's nothing worse than when you're trying to absolutely send it in the strength department and absolutely sending it in the endurance, and you're trying to build volume and build intensity and build progression both, you're going to lead to burnout. So it's about that. So specific phases within your training. And then within those specific phases, and when you are looking to have set phases or blocks within your training, I think it's about understanding what's going to work well together. All right. So, for example, strength and total aerobic capacity, bodybuilding and aerobic capacity. So, doing a hypertrophy phase while you're pushing run volume, doing a strength phase while you're pushing running volume, for example. Looking at then power and speed go hand in hand very, very well together. Hence why like Hyrox programming is so popular now, because it's power and speed, right? Things like that. It's understanding what modalities and what training approaches go well together. Once we can do that, then your programming becomes it's got more life to it. It's got more intention behind it. It's got more direction with it, and then from a training point of view, and from a training point of view, you know exactly what the intention is behind this phase of training, right? Let's hold strength where it's at, and while we push the volume and intensity with our run work, or vice versa. Let's lower the intensity and volume with our run work, and let's really push the strength side of things. Again, turning down dials, turning up dials. This is how we're going to do this. All right. Some of the most common mistakes. Some of the most common mistakes. Excuse me. Common mistakes. We're going to touch on 3 here, right? 2 is under the same kind of umbrella, and it's not programming correctly. All right. So what tends to happen is, like what we've touched on, people do too much. They come from a strength background and they go, right, okay, I don't know much about endurance, so I'm going to look at a marathon running program, and I'm going to study that, and I'm just going to do that alongside my run work. Or you get a bodybuilder who wants to get a bit fitter, so they're still training like an absolute they're still training like a full-time bodybuilder, but they want to get into they want to do the first 10K, for example. So they look at 10K running plan and they go, right, this is what I'm going to do. You're operating at 200% now. All right. Or you look at Hyrox athletes. Hyrox athletes train like a Hyrox athlete. You've got big ambitions within the Hyrox space, but you want to get really, really strong. So you start looking at a powerlifting program or a full weightlifting program, or a full weightlifting program. And again, you try and merge the two. And what that's going to happen is, again, it's going to lead to inefficient programming, too much volume, a lot of burnout, lack of progression, potential injuries. And from there, again, it's a stop-start approach then. All right. And then the second thing, when it comes down to kind of incorrect programming or not programming as best as you possibly can, is wrong session order. All right. So what typically happens, or a rule that I kind of like to follow for a hybrid style program is, let's just say we're running a 7-day training week. We start hard, and we finish easy. All right. And what that model is going to do is there's going to be a crossover between intensity and volume. So at the start, volume is going to be quite low with harder, shorter, intense run sessions, for example. But towards the end of the week is where your steady state stuff's going to come in, your threshold work, and your zone twos or your recovery runs are going to be towards the end of the week. And vice versa with your strength stuff. Again, using powerlifting and endurance here, you can do your heavy squats and your heavy deadlifts at the start of the week. And as we come to the tail end of the week, it's more hypertrophy, accessory movements, more upper body work, because that's less taxing on the CNS system. So towards the back end of the week, it's more bodybuilding centric, more accessory movements, upper body bench presses, for example. At the start of the week, heavy compound movements like your squats and deadlifts. That's what I found to be the most successful kind of method when it comes down to that. Start hard or start fast, finish slow. It's the best approach. And from an injury standpoint as well, I've seen real good results in longevity as well when we look at that model. Of course, when we start looking at like things like Hyrox and things like that, it can obviously get a little bit more tricky because people won't be able to do like Hyrox skill sessions or simulation type sessions during the week because of life obligations. So they need to kind of do that at the end. And that's why programming is very, very specific. But you should never really follow a really, really hard session with another really, really hard session. It should be a really hard session with a moderate, intense session, for example. So like a Hyrox specific simulation with then maybe a threshold run, for example, and you've just lowered lower the volume to accommodate fatigue levels and things like that. So that's how we kind of go about that. And the third most common mistake that I see is just not fueling adequately enough. We are juggling multiple different disciplines, athletic disciplines. We're juggling strength, we're juggling endurance, we're juggling Hyrox for your strength work, whatever it may be. Is just insignificant fueling. We're not looking at what macronutrients are actually the most important. Protein as an athlete is not the most important. It definitely isn't. Nobody will ever change my mind on that. Carbohydrates is what our body needs as its main macronutrient. That's not to say protein is not important. Of course, protein is important. It's just not as we don't need. As an athlete, we don't need to have 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. It's nowhere near that. We need maximum 1.6 and maybe 1.7 grams of protein per kilo of body weight of body mass. It's a lot lower than what the fitness industry like to punt at us in terms of protein intake. And that's max. So it's understanding what our body actually needs. Our body needs energy. It needs glycogen. It needs our glycogen storage topped up on a frequent basis. So high carbohydrate, calories again is going to come down to is going to play a very, very, very key role in making sure that we're in an optimal physical position to perform at our best and to be able to push again different athletic disciplines. One thing I do want to touch on is when we're training in a hybrid way. Yeah, when we're training in like a hybrid way, but wanting to diet, wanting to lose some body fat, wanting to lean out, wanting to get a little bit lighter. How the hell do we do that if we're looking at like optimal when we're looking at like optimal fueling, for example? And that's just the case of we're not going to be fueling from an optimal standpoint. Of course, we're going to be in a calorie deficit then. Our glycogen stores aren't going to be as topped up, but we can definitely improve how we do perform by looking at a couple of key things when we're dieting. is one, it's not a foot race, it's not a sprint, so take your time with your diet phase. If we look at, 20-week, 22, 24, 26 weeks of being in a deficit, that's how long we should look at it. We shouldn't look at these like 8-week summer shred kind of challenges, because it's just going to leave your performance in the absolute bin. And we don't want to over restrict ourselves. So play the long game when it comes down to getting leaner, developing an athletic physique, dropping some body fat, getting lighter. Play the long game with that. And then just carbohydrate timing is going to be key. Nutrition timing is going to be key. Pre, intra, and post workout is going to be absolutely crucial. Understand how many grams of carbohydrates that you need pre-workout. Once you get that level, do not change it. All too often people are chopping and changing things. Don't change it. Once you know exactly the carb sources and the amount that you need, keep it. It's not fucking boring. What's boring is not being able to perform at your best because insignificant fueling. So let's make sure that we're nailing that. Intra workouts, especially when we're doing our longer zone twos, our thresholds, our high rock simulation sessions, our type sessions. We've got a strength, squat, bench, and deadlift session, for example. We need to make sure that carbohydrates are getting consumed during those sessions. You absolutely need to. Just because the elite 15 of high rocks aren't taking gels or aren't taking on carbohydrates doesn't mean to say that that other people shouldn't. They're elite athletes or professional athletes. They'll have their own fueling strategy that have worked. For us, mere mortals, we need things like that. All right. So understand how long that session is going to be, how taxing it's going to be, and understand how many grams of carbohydrates you can actually take intra-session. All right. And then obviously post-session, post-nutrition, again, understand sources of protein, sources of carbohydrates that are going to digest very, very well when your body's in somewhat of a stress state from the training that is just done. Understanding that is going to be, again, key for recovery as well. Don't be having things that you're potentially allergic to, that you don't digest very, very well, that will cause bloating. That might give you the shits the next day, so on and so forth. Understand how your body reacts in a stress state to food. And once you've got, again, those sources that work very, very well for you, keep it in place. Keep it in place. I've had pretty much the same pre, intra, post-workout nutrition for the last 2 years. And I will continue to have that because performing at my best, feel my best during the session, and then recovering as best as I can is important to me. And it's obviously important to all use. That's when you're in this process, But anyway, enough rambling there. I hope this training did help. I just thought it would be a bit of an interesting topic, an interesting discussion there. Next week's training is going to be on supplementation, some of the key supplements that I want everyone to be taking and why. We're going to go a little bit into the sciencey stuff of different supplements and things like that. But other than that, team, I hope we're good. If this helped, leave it a comment, give it a like. Other than that, have a good night.